Hi, in this tutorial you will learn how to create your custom level 4 inside the Backrooms. Let's get started. First of all, you will need to download the Unity game engine. It's very important that you download the version 2022.3. You can download it from the page unity.com/releases/editors/archive. Select the last version of 2022.3 and open it with Unity Hub to install it. Once installed, it's time to create the project. To do that, simply click on the button New Project. Before creating the project, it is very important that you select the 3D HDRP template. Then name the project. In this case, I will name it ITB Mods and click on Create Project. After this, wait until Unity finish loading the project. It can take a few minutes. Once loaded, you must see a blank scene with just a blue sky, so now it's time to import the modding plugin. You can download this plugin from the link in the description. After downloading, simply drag and drop the file into the Unity window and then click Import. Excellent, now you have all ready to start creating mods. But in this tutorial we will focus on all the features to make a custom level. Let's begin with the creation of the level. For this example, I will download a template from the Unity Asset Store, but you can use the 3D models of your choice. If you get assets from the Unity Store, you need to download them from the Package Manager window. You can open this window by going to Window and then select Package Manager. Alright, now these are the assets that I downloaded. As you can see here, I am having some problems with the materials, that's why everything shows in this pink color. If you have this problem too, don't worry, this is very easy to fix. Simply go to Edit, then select Rendering, Materials and click on Convert all built-in materials to HDRP. And that's it. As you can see, now all materials and textures are displayed correctly. This level is great, but needs some lighting and post-processing tweaks. To modify this, you will need a game object with a component called Volume. Once you have this object in your level, you can add the post-process features that you want by clicking on Add Override. This process can take some time, and you need to test all the parameters to get the exact lighting results that you want. You can skip this part and go to the modding setup if you want. First of all, I started using the Visual Environment component. This allows to modify the type of sky that we want in our scene. For this case, I used a gradient sky, but you can test all the types to see what is better according to your needs. After set up the sky, I added the exposure component. This is very important cause this controls the how much bright is in the screen. The exposure value needs to be lower for scenes with no much lights and be higher for scenes with more light. In my case, I want to make this scene darker, so I set the exposure value lower. As you can see here, the scene looks very bright. That's because the level has a sunlight that makes the outside glow. To fix this, I simply deleted that sunlight. Once I had the post-processing ready, I modified the lights in the scene to make them look better. After setting all the lights up, I added some bloom and fog to the post-process volume to get a more realistic result. Alright, now we begin with the setup of the level mod. First of all, we need to create a level manager. You can do this by clicking on Game Object, ITB, Custom Level Manager. After this, if you see a red button appear, simply click on Fix and everything will be ready to start setting up the custom level. In the first section of the manager, you can set the mod name, the description and the author name. After adding that information, we need to add a level banner. For this, the plugin offers an automatically screenshot feature. simply position the main camera where you want and then click on Take Screenshot. Now that we have the mod information completed, the second section is the spawning settings. Each level needs at least one spawn point for player, one spawn point for entities and one spawn point for the respawn doors. Let's begin creating the spawn points for the player. To create this, go to GameObject, ITB, Spawn Point, Player. You will see a green sphere with an arrow. This object represents the position where the player will spawn. The arrow represents the direction that the player will spawn. Always check that the spawn point is above the ground, otherwise the player could fall below the ground object. You can add as much spawn points as you want. The game will select the spawn point randomly for each player. Now let's create the spawn points for the entities. To create this, go to GameObject, ITB, a spawn point, entity. As you can see, it's the same sphere but in color red. The process to set up this spawn point is the same as the player's spawn points. Finally, let's create the spawn points for the respawn doors. To create this, go to GameObject, ITB, a spawn point, respawn door. This type of spawn points will show as a box. That box represents the size of the door and the arrow is the direction of where the door will open. It's very important that you put this spawn points in locations that are accessible to the players. Now we need to create the route of the points that the entities will wander. To create this, go to GameObject, ITB, Waypoints Path. When the Waypoints object is selected, you will see this green line. If you press the left mouse button, a waypoint will be added in the position of the line. All the waypoints will be displayed as an colored sphere. You can modify this sphere size and color if you want. You can delete any waypoint by holding Shift and pressing left mouse button. After you've finished adding all the waypoints, you can attach the waypoint path to a spawn sector in the level manager. You can also add more spawn sectors with different paths in case you need it. In the next section, you can select the items that the player will spawn with. In this case, I want that the player spawns with a radio and a flashlight. If you selected the wrong item, you can remove it from the list by clicking on the button next to the item name. Finally, we can choose the ambient sound, music, and background sounds for our custom level. In each option, we can select between the default game sounds, no sounds, or custom sounds. If you select custom sounds, you will need to attach the audio clip of your choice and set the volume that you want in the game. The background sound options is for sounds like the screams or objects hits that can be heard in the distance while you are playing the game. If you select custom for this option, you will able to select multiple audio clips of your choice. Now we only need to add a level exit to complete the basic setup for this custom level mod. To do that, simply go to GameObject, ITB, and select Level Exit. This object is used to complete the level, so if the player enters in that blue area, then the level will be completed. Basically, reach that zone is the main objective of the level. You can position this object in places that are very hard to find or in positions that are unlocked after completing some kinds of puzzles or objectives. Excellent, you completed the basic setup for a custom level, so now you can export the mod. But there are still more things that can be added to your custom level, so I will cover all of those things before exporting the scene. I'll start explaining the character reference object. As the name says, it is just a reference of the player size. You can use this to set the correct sizes for walls or other objects. To display a character reference, go to GameObject, ITB, Character Reference. You can also create a note by going to GameObject, ITB, Default Note Object. This option will display a default note 3D model, where you can select different note variants that comes with the modding plugin. This object comes with an attached component named ITB Custom Note. Here you can set the text that you want the note display in the game. Now, if you want to use a custom 3D model of your choice as a note, just add the model to the scene and add the component ITB Custom Note to the object. There are three types of notes: the default one, page document and image document. Page documents uses a special image type called sprite, and its resolution must be 1200 per 1700 pixels. An example of one usage of this type of notes in the game are entities documents. The image document can display images of any type. It can be useful to show maps or photos. It is very important that this object has a collider, otherwise the player will not be able to interact with the note. You can also add item spawns to your scene. To add one spawner, just go to GameObject, ITB, Item Spawn. Position the object where you want to the item spawn. You can select which item will spawn by selecting it in the items list under the spawner parameters. When you changes this, it automatically displays the same item model with the same size as in the game. In the parameters you can see that there are two types of spawn, unique and per player. Unique spawns can only picked up by one player in the game session. If you choose the per player option, then the item can picked up by each player in the game session. Damage zones are areas that will damage the player when they enter. To create one of this, go to GameObject, ITB, Damage Zone. After creating one, you will see a red box. Position the object where you need it. You can select between a box or sphere zone by changing the area type in the parameters of the damage zone object. In this example, I will use this damage zone to add it to a trap object. You can give this feature different uses depending on your needs. In the parameters you can change the damage amount. Take in count that if you set the damage to 100, it will kill the player immediately. The parameter continuous damage will apply damage every second to the player. If it is disabled, then it will use the damage trace hold to interval of time between damage trigger. Player trigger zone are objects that detects when a player enters or exit. To create one, go to GameObject, ITB, Player Trigger Zone. This object requires a trigger collider. You can add an sphere or box collider by clicking on one of the red buttons. This green box is the trigger zone. You can adjust its size by scaling or modifying the collider size, then position the object wherever you want. You can see in the parameters of the zone there are two events inputs, one that triggers when the player enter and the other for the player exit. The only detect local player will only trigger the event if your player enters in the zone, otherwise it will trigger if any player in the game session enters in the zone. Also, you can set if you only need that the zone events just trigger once. In this example, I will make that the ball fall when the player enters. To achieve this, I disabled the kinematic body of rigid body in the ball on the player enter event. You can add an event by clicking on the plus button, then adding the object and selecting the event from that object. You can add any type of events, like playing an animation, playing a sound clip, enabling objects, etc. You can also add radiation zones to your scene. Go to GameObject, ITB, Radiation Zone. You will see a yellow sphere. Position the zone wherever you want. You can choose between sphere area or a box area by changing the zone type in the parameters. In this case, I will use a box area to fit it into the room. You also can add props objects that are in the game. To create prop object, go to GameObject, ITB, Spawners and select Prop Spawn. The selected prop will display with the same size as in the game. You can select different props by clicking on the prop object parameter. There you will see a list of all available objects. You also can add items inside some lootable props to make the level more interesting. To do this, just create an item spawn and position it inside the prop. You also can add custom doors models. In this example, I have this grid door. To make this door functionable, you need to add the ITB custom door component to the door object. After this, you will see a blue semicircle that represents the angle that the door will open. In some cases, you will need to identify the separated door object and assign it to the custom door component, otherwise the door will rotate with the frame included. In the door parameters, you can modify the door pivot. This is the position from which the door will rotate. The open angle parameter is how much the door will open. As you can see, this is reflected in the blue preview gizmo. To invert the side of the opening, simply check the invert open angle box. You can also make that the door is locked by default, and if you want, you can set that the door can be unlocked by using some item. When you set up a custom door, it is very important that the door object have a collider on it. As you can see in this example, I assigned a mesh collider to the frame and a box collider to the door object. If you do not assign a collider to the door object, the player will not be able to interact with it. Now you need to configure the door sounds. You can use the default sounds that comes in the game, or you can use custom sounds. In this case, I will use the default metal door sounds, but you select the best option according to your needs. After you finish setting up the door, it is very recommended that you create a prefab. You can do this simply by dragging the door object to the project window. With a prefab, you will only need to drag the door to the scene without having to configure it again. You can also use the default door models that comes in the game. For this, go to GameObject, ITB, Spawners, Interactables and select Default Door. You can select from different models, same as the prop spawn. Now, I'll show you how to create custom cabinets. Here I have a basic office cabinet with 2 drawers. It is very important that the drawers are separated objects. First of all, you need to add the ITB custom cabinet component to the object model. After doing that, we need to add the component ITB custom drawer to each drawer in the cabinet. Once added, set the drawer to the close position and press the yellow button, Save Close Position. Then set the drawer to open position and press the button, Save Open Position. Now the drawer is ready. You can preview the open and close position by clicking the buttons at the bottom of the drawer component. You also can set the drawer locked same with the same parameters as the door. Repeat the process with all the drawers in the cabinet. Don't forget to add a collider to each drawer. Once completed, you can see that the drawers are automatically updated in the cabinet object. Now let's select the sounds of the cabinet. You can choose between default sounds or custom ones. Don't forget to make the custom cabinet a prefab same as the custom door. You also can use the custom cabinet component to make chests, like the next example. Here I add the drawer component to the chest cap. And that's it. Custom cabinets are very simple to set up. You can add some Interactables objects used in the game for the puzzles like buttons, fuse boxes, etc. To create one of these objects, go to GameObject, ITB, Spawners, and select Interactables. There you will see a list of all available objects. For this example, I will set up a simple button that opens a door. You can connect one interactable prop by its event's actions. In the case of this button, it just have one event that is triggered on pressed. To add one event to the interactable, select the object and then select the component that have the action we want to trigger. In this case, I added the door object and then I selected the custom door component. Finally, I select the open function from the door. With this event system, you can connect different things in the game and make the gameplay of your level more interesting. You can add some elevators to your level if you want to connect different zones. To create an elevator, just go to GameObject, ITB, Spawners, Interactables and select Elevator. The setup of elevators are very simple. First, select the level that corresponds to the elevator. You can add up to 10 elevators. When the player presses the button with the number of the level in the elevator, then the player will be transported to the elevator with the corresponding level number. Surface types are very important if you want that the sound of the footsteps corresponds to the object type. To implement this, simply add the component named ground surface to the floor object. Once added, select the type of ground that you want. If you have multiple floor objects like this example scene, then you will need to add the component to each of those objects. You can also add water from the integrated Unity water system. Just go to GameObject, Water Surface and select the type of water surface that you want. If you don't see the water after creating it, then you will need to enable it in the project settings. To do that, click on button Open in the Water Surface component. Then under the Water Settings, check the Enable box. Now you will able to see all the parameters to configure the water, but first we need to add the water rendering to the screen effects. Select the volume object, click on Add Override and search for water rendering. By default it is disabled, so you will need to enable it. After this you will able to see the water, so now you can configure your water as you want. With this you can add pools, rivers or oceans. In case you had a custom water shader, you will need to assign the water volume manually. Just go to GameObject, ITB, Water Zone. Ensure that the blue box zone fits in your water zone. And that's it, now you know how to add water. To enable the default Unity clouds, go to the Volume Effects, click on Add Override and search for Volumetric Clouds. If an error shows, that means that you need to enable it in the project settings same as the water. Click on the Open button next to the error message and under Lighting Settings check the Volumetric Clouds option. You will see that all the parameters for the clouds are visible now. Enable all the parameters to start setting up the clouds. Excellent, now you have clouds in your scene. You can play with all of these values to look for the result that you want. After you have your level ready, you will able to export it by just clicking on the green button that says Export. Also, you will need to set your Steam ID in the mod information in case you want to upload it to the workshop. After clicking on Export, you will see that this progress bar shows up. Wait until it finish. The export process can take some minutes depending on how big is the level. After the export finished, you will able to see one file with the extension .item. For testing the mod, copy that file and go to the game folder, open the data folder, then open the streaming assets folder and finally open the mods folder, finally paste the mod file into the levels folder. Now we are ready to test the mod in the game. Let's open the game. If everything is correct, you will able to see your mod in the level selection menu. Here it is, select your level and start the game. Everything looks perfect. As you can see, here are all the objects that I put in the level. With this modding tool, you can bring any idea inside the Backrooms. There are infinite possibilities. I hope you find useful this tutorial. If you have any question or feedback, post it on the comments or in the official Discord server. I'll leave the link in the description in case you want to stay updated for news about the game. Thanks for watching.